Yeah, I sure am. I'm going to do that.
And so if we have any questions at any point, do you want me to just type those in or save those to the end, I guess? Because
yeah, you're welcome to go ahead and post those as we go if you'd like. I'm just going to mute you all so nobody will be able to yell out and have a question answered until the end.
Okay.
After I get through the PowerPoint and everything, then we'll go through and we'll do that. So I'm going to go ahead and write now, actually, because it's already starting to flip-flop back and forth.
Yep.
And mute you guys.
Okay.
But welcome. I'm coming to you live right here from my home near Banner, Kentucky, in Floyd County. And Preston asked me to speak to you all tonight about my experiences with winter growing. And so I'm actually going to go over here and share that screen with you right now. And so hopefully I'm going to double check here, make sure that's coming through for you. And it looks like it is, so that's good. And so basically, my experience with winter growing has been for about 5 winters now. So I've been doing it through some of the more mild winters that we've had in Kentucky. But then I've also experienced some of those really crazy winters that we've had in Kentucky for the past 3 years. And when I say crazy winters, they're not really crazy winters in that it's historically not happened here. We're actually going back to an old historical pattern of getting below 0 every other year like we used to prior to the 1990s. Yeah, so I've been doing it for 5 years now. I've written about this pretty extensively as well with my blog, motherofthehubbard.com. And I'm actually working on a book right now. I've been working on it for quite a while, actually, and hopefully we'll be able to publish that soon, all about how I grow in winter. But this workshop is just for you and to give you a feel for what's involved with it. My husband and I, we also farm. That's part of our income now. In March, my husband stepped away from his full-time job as an executive director to be our full-time farmer. And so we operate 4-petal farm. We were formerly in Pikeville, Kentucky, because we were on a little city lot, but now we've bought 54 acres here near Banner for over a year now, getting our farm established. We have about 1 acre in cultivation out of that 54, because that's about what we have. That's flat bottom land. And actually about 50% of that is in cover crop at any given time. But we're in plant hardiness zone 6B, which is what most of you are going to be in, even there at Pine Mountain, unless, you know, at the very tip top, you're going to have harsher winter than us. But actually winters in Kentucky are pretty mild, even though back in the winter of 2014, we hit -8, and in 2015, we hit -14. I just came from a very special meeting with Elliot Coleman, who is someone who I've always admired. I've read many of his books, and I hope some of you have as well. But excuse me, I'm recovering from bronchitis. Back in late July, Elliot and Sandy Arnold, who's a grower in New York, convened an invitation-only meeting for winter growers. And I was invited to that. There were only 15 farms that were invited to that. And it was basically for us to, us experienced growers, to share our information. And I can tell you, hearing from the other farmers up there, who have much harsher growing experiences than we do. I mean, we're talking the ground never thaws out and they can get 18 feet of snow at a time, because these were farmers from the northern US and Canada. It was pretty incredible. And it just drove home to me just really how easy we have it here in Kentucky compared to other places where they've really been the pioneers in winter growing. So my growing has been with low tunnels, which you see here on the left. That was my previous garden space that we were selling out of. We had operated a winter CSA out of that, and we're able to grow about a ton of food out of that less than 6/107 acre spot every year. So that we were urban ag folks at that time. Now we're holler ag, because instead of being on a nice sun exposed hillside, we're down in the bottom of a holler out here in Floyd County. And that has its own unique challenges to it. But we were able to come through this past winter just using low tunnels with fabric row cover only, no clear plastic, which blows a lot of people away because they think, oh, well, you're really going to have to lay heat to plants, and you're really going to have to coddle them through the winter. And what we've been able to demonstrate is really here in Kentucky, even where we hit that -14 Fahrenheit, those extreme lows, they don't last that long. And so many of the plants can make it. So I just want to give you a little flavor first of what our farm does. We do sell a limited amount at the farmer's market. And so these were some of our offerings that we had this past October and November at the Pikeville Farmers Market. This is our winter CSA that we offered 2 years ago. We didn't offer it last year because we just moved to this new farm, and we were worried about jumping into growing in a new spot and people paying money up front and us not really being able to predict how things would go. And so we chose instead to only offer an online store. I'll show you that in a moment. But what you're seeing in these photos, these go chronologically. A January share up there in the top left, a February share in the middle, a March share shown up in the top right. And I should mention that March share was 2 weeks after we dipped down to -14. That was what we were able to pull out of our low tunnels. So all those plants had been exposed to incredibly frigid temperatures and made it through just great. Salad greens and leeks and cabbage. And then down in the bottom left corner is our April share. And so you can see in the April share, we're still pulling out overwintered cabbages and purple sprouting broccoli, or those, those purple shoots, sprouts that you see there. Lots of fun salad mixes with flowers from overwintered brassicas that had started to bolt. And so, yeah, so even with, the coldest winter that we'd had on record since the 1990s, the early 1990s, we were able to do it pretty well. And in this past year as well, in our new spot, even sell from an online storefront. But we also do a significant portion of our sales to restaurants. So we've got a few high-end restaurants in Pikeville that we sell to, and we even have one of them has some dishes that have our farm's namesake on them, like a 4-petal farm pizza. We also sell microgreens and shoots, and these go over remarkably well in our part of the world. We do a limited amount of farm to school as well. So that's a little bit about who we are and what we do. So let's dive right in then, and let's talk about the essential elements of how you go about growing in winter. And a big part of it is choosing the right plants. Many people are disappointed when they hear that I'm not going to be able to teach them how to grow tomatoes in winter. Tomatoes are a heat-loving plant. And even if you could coddle them through the winter, the flavor of that tomato would just be so subpar, it's not going to be worth it. So a lot of it is choosing the right plants that can handle these freeze-thaw cycles. And so an example here is fava bean. This was on a 25-degree morning here. So fava beans are different than your traditional green beans that you might grow up poles in your garden. These are a cold acclimated crop. And so you can see, this was in my previous garden in Pikeville. There's frost on the roof, and the fava beans are all limp, and it looks like the frost may have killed them, but later that same morning, they've perked right back up. And I took a video of my garden last year, so that way people could better appreciate just how these plants do perk up. So you can see this was a morning. It was early in the fall. I hadn't even bothered to put up my low tunnels yet, which was kind of crazy in hindsight. But you can see even at 26 degrees for our first really hard freeze for that year, these plants that are cold acclimated and cold tolerant have really just been able to bounce right back and recuperate. So a lot of it is all about choosing plants that have this capability. And so I'm just going to go on. You can see, for instance, these are collards here on the far left. After a very hard freeze, it got down to 0 outside the tunnels. And it still freezes inside the tunnels. I want to make that clear too. But these are plants that are able to withstand the freezing. You can see that middle image is those same plants later that day. And then the image on the right is collards that have survived the whole winter. And now they're bolting. And actually, we made more money selling the shoots from the collards, the rob. So just like collard is a brassica, and so just like broccoli, it will send up that nice little crown, but they're much smaller because they've not been bred for a nice big crown like broccoli does. But you can see those have been picked on all winter, and now it's spring. This is mid-March, and the collard is shooting out these rob or rapini. And we sold a lot of that. It was incredibly sweet in contrast to broccoli rob or rapini. So I just want to make sure that we're all clear on that in winter gardening, you'll still see freezing. So the whole goal here is not necessarily to avoid freezing, but it's selecting the right types of vegetables that can tolerate that freezing and tolerate it really well. So again, there's just a before and after image of some Asian greens that have made it through a really hard freeze. And, you know, later in the day, you can't even tell. Now, of course, there's limits to that, especially when we get to really cold temperatures like we had back in 2014 when it got down to -8 here. You can see significant enough freezing that it even heaved the ground. So that can be damaging to plants. But that's that same tunnel the very next day. And so, you know, here in Kentucky, we will have those dips, but they don't last very long. And so that makes this low tunnel technology pretty possible. So here's another view of those tunnels there. There was very light snow cover that year. Snow can be an insulator, but that very light snow on the tunnels in that particular freeze, wind chills were estimated to about -36, and still the plants did well at that. And so this was the following week and some of the harvests that we were able to get out of there. And one thing can happen with plants that have been freeze thawing is you can get a lot of stems that split and the plants just don't look very pretty. But even after being at -8, these are some pak choi that I had protected in the tunnels. You can see, wow, they came through it just remarkably well. So pak choi, you know, Asian greens are great. We've talked about brassicas already. Root crops are phenomenal in winter. This is actually how I started winter gardening. It was totally by accident. I'd left some.
Can you hear us?
Oh, yeah.
We can't see some of those pictures that you're talking about. Your screen is actually just black.
Oh, no.
Yeah. There we go.
Oh, okay. Wow. So you've not been able to see any of that, huh?
No, and I just figured out how to I just saw where I could unmute my microphone. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
But if you just want to show us about where the fava beans, you started talking about the fava beans, I think that's where we lost you. So if you
okay.
Show us those pictures there, that'd catch us back up.
Gotcha. So let me see if I can't go back here. You said about the fava beans then? Was that the last one you could see?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so maybe whenever it played the video, it went a little nutso then. So I'll just, yeah, so I had a video there of the plants rebounding back to life and perking back up after that freeze like I was demonstrating to you there. So I'll just kind of fast forward here through these pictures so you can kind of appreciate. So this is the day before our the day of our -8 freeze, the previous night, and the next day after it had warmed up. And some more images of those same tunnels. And there's that pak choi that I was telling you about. Okay, so does that bring us back up then?
Yep, we're good.
We're good? Okay,
yep.
Awesome. Okay, so let me go back to my view on there. So, I was telling you about how I got into this in the first place, is that it was totally by accident. I had just given birth the previous year to my daughter, who's 6 years old now. And you know how it is when you've got a second kid now that's arrived, things are like really crazy. And so the garden at the end of the summer, usually we always put it into cover crop, and we just didn't have time. We were really naughty like that. And so from where the garden didn't go in cover crop, whatever had been left at the end of the summer just stayed in there all through the winter. And I went out in that following February to garden plan, and it was a mild winter. And, you know, because this was back in 2010. And I see these little carrot tops. They didn't look the greatest, but there were carrot tops out there. And so I'll pull up this carrot, and the carrots looked fine, but I thought they would be woody, and I thought they would be pithy and bland. And I thought, well, I'll still take them anyway. You know, I can at least cook them in a stew or something. So I took them in, scrubbed them up, and I was about to throw them in the pot. And I thought, well, I better taste this first and make sure it's not nasty. And I bit into it, and it was the most sweet, incredibly tasty carrot I'd ever had. And it was like some kind of magical transformation had happened to this carrot. And these were the same carrots, mind you, that had been in the garden at the end of the summer. And I knew what they tasted like, and that's why they were still in the ground. They did not taste very good at all. And so, of course, I went to Google to try to figure out why this magical transformation had taken place. And when I Googled sweet winter carrots, Elliot Coleman's name came up. And Elliot, as I mentioned before, is the premier expert on winter growing in the United States. He's written many books on winter growing, and he has made a name for growing these candy carrots and selling them from his organic farm in Maine. And so I thought, you know what? Wow, if he's doing those kind of things up in Maine, which is a whole plant hardiness zone colder than me, he's doing it in these unheated greenhouses with low tunnels inside. Well, I'm a plant hardiness zone warmer, so maybe I can get by with just doing it with just the low tunnels, which are a lot cheaper. And here I have this hillside lot, and it'd be a lot easier to do. And it was funny, I was talking to Elliot at the meeting that we had in Vermont that he invited me to, and he was like, wow, you know, what you're doing in Kentucky is so cool. He said, I had been telling people that are in plant hardiness zones warmer, they could probably just get by with doing a high tunnel and an unheated greenhouse with no low tunnels inside. But you've totally flipped that on your head or on its head, and you're doing the low tunnels, you know, the cheap way, and having these great results and getting by without a high tunnel. So that was pretty exciting to hear that from him. So other crops that you can grow, it's pretty diverse, pretty remarkably diverse. There's 5 major cold tolerant crop families. We've mentioned brassicas already, but also Another family, the alliums, are remarkably cold tolerant. And you've probably been a winter gardener already if you've grown garlic by planting the cloves in the fall and then letting it overwinter. You know how cold tolerant garlic is. But also beets and spinach. That first year when I did this accidentally, I had spinach that overwintered and it got remarkably sweet as well. Of course, after we tried the carrots, we were trying these other things too. Of course, the other things that are in the same family as carrot, like cilantro, even though we think of cilantro as being a salsa, an herb that goes well with tomatoes and other heat-loving crops. Cilantro is probably one of the most cold-tolerant herbs. And if you have trouble growing cilantro in summer, you'll find it way easier in fall and winter. It won't immediately bolt because it prefers the cold. Other crops, the lettuce family, and this also includes things like endive and radicchio, which we love. For many people, it's kind of bitter, but if you grow it in the colder months of the year, wow, it is phenomenal. That bitterness largely goes away. And then, of course, the brassicas. So these are some of the things that we specialize in. We grow a lot of root crops, lots of really fun multicolored carrots, lots of fun multicolored overwintering radishes. These are daikon radishes that are remarkably sweet, again, when grown in winter. And those are always a hit at the farmer's market, and our restaurant customers love those also. Other crops that are appropriate, lots of greens. So here's some beautiful, this is a Belfiore radicchio, which is just phenomenal in salad, endive. Lots of different salad greens, including baby kales. Here's some of that endive and radicchio. Pak choy, the Asian greens, are real troopers when it comes to cold tolerance. So we grow a lot of different kinds of those. Actually, we did a trial. Oh, I lost count of how many different Asian greens we trialed last year. Here's some of them. Some of the winners in that trial were this big, beautiful pak choy called Yokata Na, like you see here. So this was after the garden hit 0 degrees, and it stayed frozen for quite a while after that. For several days, we had temperatures in the single digits. And so many of the Asian greens we harvested beforehand because we saw the weather report, but then we left a fair amount because the whole point was to do a trial and be able to plan for this year when we'd really ramp up production in this new spot. And so my daughter there is handling or holding the Yokata Na, which is a great stir-fry green. And then also this is turnip green, but it's an Asian green turnip green. It's grown not for the root, but for the greens. It's called Notsawana. And those were the clear winners in that trial. Here's some more examples. These also vary in cold tolerance by their size too. So some things that will die at 0 degrees or -8, they'll die if they're mature. Well, they'll make it through just fine if they're baby size. And so that's what I was trying to show in this picture here. These were planted here, the ones in the background, about 2 weeks earlier, and they were more mature, and you can see they all died. And this is that later sowing where the plants aren't mature, exposed to the same temperatures, same conditions, but they made it through just fine. Other crops, we really like overwintered brassicas. So not all cabbages will do this, but there are special varieties of cabbage that are bred specifically for overwintering. And so this is one here called Maribel. There's also a variety called Dead On that's really good for that. And then also there are some broccolis that if you plant them in the late summer, they won't form crowns in the fall, even though I love fall broccoli. These are grown specifically to overwinter as plants. And then in the early spring, they'll take off. They'll survive the winter temperatures. And then in late March and early April, about the time when a lot of people around here are setting out broccoli transplants, at that same time, we're harvesting broccoli shoots for sale. So the sprouting broccoli is just a big hit. It's just so colorful and flavorful, and we love to do it. And then, different specialty greens that if you didn't want to commit to a tunnel, you could still grow. So corn salad or mosh is a gourmet green that will stay beautiful even with very minimal protection. I even had it on the year we hit -8 with no protection, just a thin layer of snow. It made it through just fine and was totally beautiful. But this is a gourmet green. You can get this tiny little clamshell of it in Whole Foods or Kroger's for $5. And we love it. It's got a great flavor also, kind of nutty kind of flavor to it. The Asian greens, because they are such troopers, we grow a lot of those just as baby size, and we cut them on them all winter long. And those make up a large part of our salad mix, primarily because we've experimented around with lettuce in the low tunnels, and we can get it to survive the winter in the low tunnels. But as far as growing for market, the quality isn't there for growing for market in a low tunnel. So actually this year we're putting in a high tunnel, and that high tunnel is going to allow us to have a little bit more protection for our crops so that we can do also some lettuce sales. Because, not everybody is crazy about eating baby Asian greens all winter long, or baby kale. And they really like to have that lettuce mix in winter too. So we're also adding the high tunnel growing of lettuce. Okay, so choosing the right plants is one thing, but that gets you so far. There's limits to that. Crop protection is another. So we've already established that cold temperatures are not that big of a deal for many of these crops. But the drying out of the tissues of the plants is. And so that's what I mean there by desiccation. Really, it's the drying out of the plant tissues that's more damaging to plants than the cold. That the air is drier in winter. The winter winds augment that drying. And then also as the plants freeze, they also move water out of their cells. And that is how, they protect themselves from freeze damage. But it also, causes them to wilt, and it makes them more susceptible to drying, those drying conditions. So we use a fabric row cover called Grow Guard 34. It's made by Atmore Industries. Deerfield Supplies in Elkton, Kentucky is a carrier of it. I know a lot of people use Deerfield Supplies for things. That's equivalent to another fabric row cover that's a little more popular called Agribon. But our experience has been that the Agribon just doesn't hold up as well as Grow Guard does. And so we go through the whole winter, most of the winter, with a single layer of Grow Guard. And we'll add an additional layer when the temperatures drop below 15 degrees Fahrenheit. When I first started out, I was using clear plastic in our system, but that was a lot of venting, okay? The fabric row covers are permeable to air and water. So the sun can hit those tunnels, and, provided it's not, a 60-degree day, which we will occasionally get in February here. Provided it's not warm that day, I don't have to go out there and vent those tunnels. If it, however, is even a sunny 25-degree day, and I have clear plastic, you bet your bottom dollar I'll have to be out there venting every single tunnel on the place, because the temperatures in those things, even when it's 25 degrees outside, on a clear plastic covered tunnel, it can get in the 90s, which is not good for those plants. One, it promotes disease. Two, it stresses them. And most importantly, it causes them to lose all their cold acclimation. So the cold acclimation is a very active process on the part of the plants. And it requires accumulating sugars in their tissues. That's why those carrots get phenomenally sweet. They're accumulating sugar as a natural antifreeze to help them withstand the cold temperatures. So sugars are one thing, different cold tolerance proteins are another. So anytime you keep those plants too warm, you can tip that balance to where now that plant loses all those things that are helping it resist the freezing. So then when you do have a really cold spell, you can lose everything. And actually, we saw this play out back in 2014. 2014, we had that dip down to -8 with the polar vortex. And here I am with my little low tunnels out in eastern Kentucky. And I came through it unscathed. And I had friends out in central Kentucky where it didn't even get as cold. And, you know, it still got sub-zero, but they lost everything in their high tunnels. And the difference was that I had kept my plants cold acclimated leading into the event, into the deep freeze. Whereas on Facebook, just like a week prior, you know, it was New Year's Eve and they were talking about how great it was to be in their high tunnel in shorts, you know, and at 85 degrees in their high tunnel on New Year's Eve. So their plants essentially had been taken out of being cold acclimated from where it was so warm in there. Whereas mine kept all those freeze tolerance proteins. So let's talk then about how we construct these tunnels. All my images for this, well, most of them are coming from my old lot in Pikeville, simply because I made the effort at that time to really get some good photos of things. But these, we've now moved to a little bit different system. You can see here in this picture, this one's covered with Agribon, which we don't use anymore. This one's covered in clear plastic, which we don't use anymore. But everything's principles are still the same. Another thing that's different is in these previous pictures, you can see there's PVC pipe that we were using then. Now we're doing everything with 1/2-inch EMT, which I love to use. The cost is absolutely comparable, but there's a major difference in the structural integrity. So what you're seeing here are tunnels under 13 inches of snow. These here are with EMT. This is on our new place. These are with PVC. And you can see they are just absolutely flattened with the weight of the snow on the PVC. There's just no structural integrity to it. Versus after that snow event, they made it through just A-okay. Not going to be able to show you this video here because I'm afraid to go into slideshow mode again. But this is my husband bending the EMT. It bends very easily. Even at that time, she was 5 years old. Our youngest daughter was able to bend these hoops. I mean, they bend remarkably easily, but they're very structurally sound once they get into that arc. You can get these benders from Johnny's Selected Seeds, but our extension office let us borrow theirs. And so we used theirs and got set up and gave it back. So we weren't out anything for that. As far as if you were to use PVC, same principle would apply. You just take something to make yourself some holes at least every 5 feet apart. We use a digging bar. Love using the digging bar because it goes quick, and I just mark up 12 inches with duct tape from the bottom of that digging bar. So I make sure that every hole is 12 inches deep. And that's where I'm going to insert the end of my hoop. Some people will tell you to use rebar. We did use rebar back on our city lot because it was on a slope and there were some places where the ground was uneven, and so we had to do that because of getting the hoops to set just right. So we used that in a few places. Personally, I don't like using the rebar. It's not as structurally sound. And then you've got metal in the garden, which can be a hazard if you got little ones running around. You know, you turn around and you pull that PVC pipe off there or your conduit off there, and now you've got this exposed stake sticking up out of the ground. Also, I don't like having anything like that left in the ground because it's just an opportunity for it to get left behind, and then your equipment get messed up hitting it. So you don't have to do that. Just trust me, just dig a hole and you're good. Then if you're using PVC, it's just a matter of, inserting one end of that 10-foot length of 1/2-inch PVC into one side, and then putting your holes on the opposite side and bringing it across like so. So, and that could go pretty quick. So I used to, on that city lot, I could build a 30-foot long tunnel by myself in about 20 minutes. So it goes pretty fast. Then it's a matter of covering the structure. Let me move this out of the way maybe so you can see that. So just, putting your row cover out, securing it at each end is really important. We don't weight our tunnels down like this anymore. This was back 4 years ago. I'll show you our system here in a minute, but that closure at the ends is incredibly important. You want to tie those things down, especially if you're going to use clear plastic, which I've already said I don't really recommend. If you use clear plastic, you're going to be fighting row covers flying off all the time, in addition to having to vent them. But even with the fabric row covers, you want to cinch those things down on the ends in case you were to get a gust of wind. It helps keep that cover secure, and at least if it does blow off the tunnel, it's not going to completely blow away. When we were on the hillside and we were subjected to a lot of winds, we tied the tunnels down in this fashion, kind of loop-de-loop from stakes that were driven at the base of every other hoop. And then it was just a matter of like lacing string across. Here's another view of that here. And there's different, at that time we were expecting wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. So I wanted to make sure that, again, was back when we were using plastic. I wanted to make sure that didn't go flying away. And so I had double laced the tunnels to make sure they didn't go anywhere. Okay, and then as a matter of harvesting in that kind of system, the tunnel sides just roll right up and make it really easy to access the produce. You just have to reach in. I had a newspaper lady ask me one time, do you send your girls inside those tunnels to harvest? Which I just thought was so cute. But no, it's just a matter of rolling up those sides. Okay, I'm going to skip those. I've got some YouTube videos of them opening and closing the structures, but that's not important to risk losing connection there. We also do a lot of greens in extra low tunnels. So you can either get fencing wire and cut these yourself. It's just 9-gauge fencing wire that you can get in a roll at your big box store like a Lowe's or a Home Depot. Or you can buy them pre-cut, which is actually the same cost and a little bit cheaper, actually, when you count your labor in with things, and they're a better gauge to boot. So we do these mini hoops for salad greens, keeping the row covers really close to the plants like you see here. And actually, some of the growers at the winter meeting, the winter growing meeting in Vermont that I was telling you about, a lot of the winter growers there have experimented with how high to keep their inner low tunnels to their plants inside those unheated greenhouses. And they have discovered that, you know, as close as you can get them to the plants as possible without them actually touching the plants is really beneficial. The interior stays a lot warmer. So we've certainly found that to be true here as well. And so this is on a warm winter's day, and we've got everything opened up. And looking inside, I believe this is a January shot here. So you're seeing beds of Asian greens and beds of baby kale, and those make up the bulk of our salad mix. And this is them by March 8th. So we've been cutting on those all winter long, but the regrowth in those is just phenomenal, even in cold temperatures and in the low light of winter that we get. And so you can see some of these plants are even starting to bolt at that time as well. That's just a natural thing that's going to happen come springtime. So why low tunnels? Because, you know, there are these NRCS grants available, the EQIP grants or high tunnel initiatives, which we are doing. That's how we're putting our high tunnel up this year, is we received one of those. But why did we do low tunnels to start with? Well, the main thing is that they are so darn cheap to do. So if you think about, you know, you're going to cover the same amount of area, let's say 2,400 square feet in this example, with a high tunnel versus a low tunnel, several low tunnels over the same area. Our reimbursement rate for our high tunnel is $4.50 per square foot. Okay, for installing our high tunnel, purchasing it, everything, and still we're going to have to pay something out of pocket. Okay, but even if we consider the government's reimbursement rate, what they anticipate it's going to cost you to put one of these things in, you're looking at, for 2,400 square feet, a payout of $10,800. That's a pretty hard pill to swallow for an initial, you know, you're a beginning farmer and you want to do some season extension. That's a big chunk of change versus that same area of ground. If you were to buy all the hoops that you would need for all the low tunnels to cover that same 2,400 square feet, you're looking at an initial investment of $552. I mean, that's, you know, 5/100ths of the cost of a high tunnel right there. So, and especially here in Kentucky where we can use the low tunnels, then it just makes sense. If you want to, if you're a beginning farmer and you're wanting to try it out, then that's a great route to go. Now that cost actually drops down quite a bit when you consider wire hoops versus the EMT. So those little mini hoops that I showed you for salad greens. So whereas the wire hoops, or sorry, the EMT hoops, you were looking at about 28 cents per square foot. Actually less than that if you consider that you're you don't have to pay for your paths. So really you're looking at, you know, about 22 cents per square foot. The wire hoops, that actually drops down to 13 cents per square feet for your initial costs. So if we consider just one bed, then, you know, about $26 to cover a 4 by 50 foot bed to just dabble with season extension. So, I mean, for us, it's just like a no-brainer. They make a lot of sense just from an economic perspective, but then also considering where we started out, our topography, to get a high tunnel, an unheated greenhouse on a slope was, you know, we didn't even consider that. But the low tunnels, we were able to adapt very easily to what we had to start with our sloping site. Also with low tunnels, they're just not as subjected to collapses with snow like the high tunnels are. And that may not make sense because, oh gosh, these are these smaller structures. But it's true. We've seen it play out. Now, that's not true if you're using the PVC. The PVC will flatten. But our experience is with these, the electric metal tubing, the EMT, the electrical conduit, they are tough. And they can handle a snow load because they're not having to support such a large square area of snow. There's not as much weight on top of the EMT as there is on a structure that's spanning, say, 30 feet across. And so unless you get out to a high tunnel and you're removing all that snow, then you're setting yourself up for a catastrophe like you see here. And that snow cover can be really beneficial. So on our tunnels, unless it was to be like this crazy snow event, well, even then, I mean, I would not go out there to try to remove snow. When we had the crazy snow in 2015 where we got oh gosh, how many inches of snow was that? I think it was something like 19 inches of snow in a matter of 24, 36 hours. I mean, it built up and it built up and it built up on our tunnels. On the PVC, that was back when we were using PVC, not all of them collapsed. And what was really crazy was the ones that were the wire, the 9-gauge wire, those mini hoops, none of them collapsed. Some of them kind of compressed a little bit, but none of them flattened. And again, it's that, okay, well, how much volume of snow is it having to support? And on those teeny tiny little hoops, relative to the surface area underneath, it's really not a lot. And the snow surrounding can help out too. And you want that snow. So here's an example of when you don't have snow cover and what can happen to temperatures inside of a low tunnel. And so you can see this happened overnight, and it's no snow cover. It's getting down to 11.8 degrees and lower in those tunnels. This, by the way, we hit 0 degrees was the ambient temperature. And this is it inside the tunnels with snow. And you can see, oh, okay, well, yeah, it dipped, but it sure didn't dip as low and didn't even really dip much below freezing at all with the snow cover on. Low tunnels are also great because they're versatile. So if you're using PVC, for instance, you can support insect netting. We are using our hoops, I should have had a picture of this, to support shade cloth in the summer. We grow salad greens year-round, including lettuce when it's 100 degrees outside, which is nuts. But we're able to get by with it without it getting incredibly bitter because we're doing it under shade cloth. And so we use those same metal hoops to do the shade cloth. We also like them because we can move them around the garden. One thing with high tunnel is, once that structure is erected, you can't move it. And so growers have to watch out with the types of fertilizers that they use, because those fertilizers use in the tunnel, it can build up toxic levels of soluble salts in the tunnels and present major growing problems. And one way high tunnel growers can get around that is just to run irrigation for hours and hours on end to flush and push those soluble salts down. But we're able to do that naturally. We don't ever have to worry about that with the low tunnels because, the tunnels are moved around, and so they're always getting rain. And as a matter of fact, those fabric row covers are permeable to rain, and so we never have to worry about that. Also, we can grow cover crops. A lot of people don't want to grow cover crops in their high tunnel because it's such a high value space. So they want to have something for market all the time in them, rather than taking a high tunnel out for a year of production just to grow a cover crop on it. But we also like them because, you know, they're, I was going to mention here that ability to grow cover crop is really important for us because we're transitioning to organic. And part of our organic transition plan is we have, you know, we're demonstrating and we're committed to building our soil with cover crops. So at any given season on our farm, 50% of it is in cover crop. But another reason we like them also is we don't have to do a lot of irrigation. You know, if you do a high tunnel, even in winter, you're going to have to turn on the irrigation. In winter, we don't have to irrigate ever. You know, if you've been out in your yard in winter, it's soggy. You know, you just don't get a lot of transpiration from the plants. They're not using a lot of water, and the ground just tends to stay soaked. And so we never have to irrigate because that's just the natural tendency of the ground. The fabric row covers are permeable to water, but they also, those shed a little bit of water. Not all that water makes it through the row cover. So if you can see here in this picture, the beds inside are moist, but they're not muddy like the paths. And so that makes it great for spring. We can get a jump start on planting in those beds because they're relatively drier than everywhere else. And because we're kind of going to a permanent bed system here, you know, it's not like we need to get in there and till anyway. We can just work up the bed with something like a broad fork, and then we can plant right into it. But scheduling that planting is probably the most important thing. And we're in high gear with this right now because what happens is, yeah, you got to get the plants, you got to choose the right plants, but you also have to plant in advance enough that they reach or are getting close to the size you want them to be at in, let's say you want them to be a certain size in January. Well, they pretty much have to be pretty close to that size about mid-November, because what happens is, you know, temperatures get so cold that growth rate slows down, but also light is a huge limiting factor. So both of these pictures here, like this one here was from 2014, I believe it was, in November, the first week of November. And then this is late October of this past year. And you can see, wow, everything's huge, right? That's the size we wanted those particular beds to be in going into the winter, because we knew January they would be pretty darn close to that size. So how have we established mid-November? It's by knowing that plant growth is really going to slow down when we get less than 10 hours of sunlight every day. And Elliot Coleman coined the phrase Persephone days for this period of time in the winter where there's less than 10 hours of daylight. And so you can see here in Kentucky, for us, that starts around November 22nd. You can see the farther north you go, that starts earlier in the fall. But for here in Kentucky, it's November 22nd. So we know pretty much everything. That's our target date for planting. And so I've experimented a lot with a lot of different types of plants. And so this is one of the handouts that Preston has for you. This is going to be coming out in the book that I mentioned earlier about how to go about doing this. But what you're seeing here is the T's, the little T's are when you would need to start transplants. The big T's are when you would set those transplants out. And then let's see, the things that look like semicolons, or I'm sorry, that look like colons, that's for direct sowing for mature plants. And then the ones that look like periods there are for baby greens or baby roots. So essentially, this is through 5 years of experimenting, what I've found out are my target dates for getting things in the ground. So for instance, you can see there that the window for planting beets for us has pretty well passed if you want nice, sizable beets, because you wouldn't have needed to do that in early August, the first half of August. You could still plant beets now, but they're going to be more baby beet size. They're not going to be the nice big roots that a lot of people like. Though I have certainly planted them in the first week of September, and come, late February, they've sized up okay. But the issue that you get into is these are biennial crops. And so even if you were to let those into the ground past March, you would think, oh, okay, well, that's fine. Come spring, it'll just start growing again, and I'll get a big root at that point. Well, these are biennial plants, and because they've been subjected to the cold temperatures, they think they have been through a cold season. They're in their next year, and so they'll start throwing flowers to reproduce. So, so that's why this timing is so critical. You're also fighting the plant's natural reproductive cycle, and it's not like you can just play catch up come March and get an early start. Many of these plants, once they get into March and those longer days arrive in late February and early March, they'll immediately start throwing flowers, and the quality just degrades after that point. I've also experimented not just with planting dates, but also planting different kinds of varieties. So for instance, these are 2 different kinds of carrot, and you can see, wow, what a difference in their survival after freezing temperatures. Generally, I've found that heirloom varieties are a little more cold hardy than hybrids. And that's just a lot of the hybrids now are being bred more for looks, and can they make it from California to Kentucky on the truck and still come out looking okay. Whereas the old heirloom varieties, they were really bred for getting people through the winter, and some of them are just so gorgeous as well and fun. So this is a winter radish. Winter radishes used to be incredibly popular and a major food crop for Americans and Europeans. This is a French heirloom called Violet de Gournay. It's white inside, wonderful roasted or on the grill. These are turnips here. This is another overwintered type of radish called Black Spanish. It's black skin, but white on the inside, and just great. So this is the other handout that I asked Preston to give you all. These are some of my recommended varieties, and they're ranked in order of cold hardiness here. So some of my recommended varieties for you. But another thing to pay attention to, though, I'm just going to go back to this picture. These are just general guidelines for planting dates. Another thing that you've got to consider is that a cabbage is not just a cabbage. There are some cabbages that take 60 days to mature, and there are some cabbages that take 90 days to mature or longer. And so when you're planting for fall or winter harvest, you really want to pay attention to those days to maturity. And so generally what you can do, a lot of people will tell you, well, count back from your first frost date. Whatever your days to maturity are, count back from your first frost date, and that's when you know when you should plant them. Add about 2 or 3 weeks, just because growth rate slows in fall. But use that first frost date as your guide. I don't use first frost date. because let's face it, all these things are cold tolerant plants, right? What's more important is that onset of the Persephone days. So what I have always used as my guide is the onset of the Persephone days. And so, for instance, I know then, in my experience in the garden has borne this out, that if I am going to plant something like carrots, okay, and expect to get any kind of harvest at all, if my days to maturity is 58 days, and I know this is the onset, November 22nd is the onset of my Persephone days, I absolutely must get seeds in the ground no later than September 11th. And that's for baby carrots, because growth rate's going to slow so much. So that's a little helpful guide that you can use. But when you're planting, one thing that you might run into, and this will be in my book also, but you're welcome. I've given Preston the link to the slide share for these, so you can have it for a reference to print out. But one thing you can run into also is you're planting these things in late summer and the soil temperatures are really hot. You'll find that many of these seeds, they have optimum ranges for germination, and some things just will not germinate if you direct sow them when the soil temperature is 88 degrees or 92 or whatever it may be. So for instance, a lot of people have trouble growing spinach in fall because spinach, for instance, has such a cool optimum germination temperature. Let me pull it up here. 65 degrees. And so if you're going to get it in time, you'll either need to start the transplants inside where it's cooler, or you can pre-germinate your seeds. And I've done this with spinach with great success. Rather than sowing the seeds right out of the packet out in the field, what I'll do is I'll take a little bit of potting soil and wet it and put it in there with my spinach seeds and put the whole thing in the fridge or down in my basement for a few days. And I'll let those spinach seeds get going. You know, they'll already germinate. I won't do it so far as you got to watch though. You don't want to let them actually start sprouting in there. As soon as you start seeing a little rootlet there on any of the seeds, you want to immediately get them in the ground, or else you risk breaking that root off as you plant them. But that's one strategy that you can use. But that's just something to pay attention to, is that some of these have very specific optimum germination temperatures. And so even for something like spinach, the upper limit is, as far as its optimum range, is 70. So you might have to play around with different conditions there. Also, you want to consider that not all seeds are created equal. I've found this to be true with getting seeds from different suppliers. There's considerable difference in cold hardiness from different companies. So, we select for things intentionally and sometimes unintentionally. So if you're buying, for instance, collards from a company that's growing them out in California, where it never gets below 45 degrees at night, you're going to see a difference in cold hardiness of that variety versus if you bought that variety from a company that's overwintering those collards and then saving the seeds from those overwintered collards. So I've seen this play out so many times. So now I've got trusted seed suppliers that I use. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a good one. They're leaders in helping people grow through the winter. And they have great seed that's adapted for overwintering. And they do a lot of research with it. Osborne Seed Company is another good one. They're out on the West Coast, but Still, they get some cold winters. Adaptive Seeds, Wild Garden Seed, High Mowing Organic Seeds. These are companies that I go to again and again and have really great success with their seeds. But then you could even find some locally adapted seeds in some cases, where people may have been growing, turnips historically here have been a staple food crop for people through the winter, and mustard greens. I mean, I was really excited when we moved here. Here I'd built up this reputation as being the winter grower in Pike County, and then we moved out here to Floyd County, and in the fall, 3 of my neighbors up this holler here had fall gardens that they were planting, and they let a lot of that stuff grow through the winter. So that was pretty exciting. That's our culture here, to be self-sufficient in that way. And so it could be that you might find near you some people that have some locally adapted seed. So those are just some things to consider there. Other things you want to keep in mind if you're going to do low tunnels, heat's your enemy, not the cold. If you go over, I keep a sensor inside my tunnels, and I try to make sure that they never get over 65 degrees inside the tunnels. And so a lot of times on those rare warm sunny days we have in January and February, occasionally we get in the 50s and 60s. I'll go up there and I'll just take the tunnel covers completely off and let those plants get some sunshine. They benefit from it. It helps warm that soil. And more importantly, it prevents the tunnels from getting too hot. Because even though those fabric row covers can let air in and out, they'll still accumulate heat. And then also keep in mind that light's really important. So you can do heavier row covers than the Grow Guard 34, but you're also going to sacrifice light getting to the plants. So we just opt for, okay, we're going to use 1 layer of row cover and through most of the growing season. And then when it's going to be less than 15 degrees, we'll throw that second layer on. You're welcome to look at, I've got a lot of resources on my blog, motherofAHubbard.com, about winter growing. Hopefully within the next month, I'm going to finish this darn book that I've been working on. Our farm business, when John quit his job in March, I'd planned on being done with that book in April, and I had to just put everything on hold. If those of you that have started a business, you know exactly what I'm talking about there. It's been a big endeavor. But with that, I'm going to let Preston unmic you there and open it up to any questions you might have. Okay?
I had a question. I had a question about the type of sensor that you're using inside the high tunnel there, or the low tunnel rather.
Yeah, so I've experimented around with different sensors, and back when I was in Pikeville and my bedroom window was right there by the garden, I just used these little cheap indoor-outdoor thermometers that you can get at Walmart or Lowe's, where it's just a little outdoor sensor that you can hang, and it communicates to a receiver in your house. I mean, they're usually like $15 for the receiver that will show you your indoor temperature, and then the transmitter that you can put outside. And I actually had a receiver that could take up to 4 of those. And so I was able to monitor many different tunnels at one time. And that was really important early on when I was using both clear plastic and the fabric row cover. Now my gardens are quite a distance away from our house. And so that uses a radio frequency. And so I couldn't use those anymore. So now what I'm using is a device that can connect to your smartphone, and it's called a Kestrel Drop. and that's spelled Kestrel, like the bird, a kestrel, kestrel drop. And so basically you have an app on your phone, and that was what I showed in that one picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was, I just took a screenshot of what I was seeing on my phone. And so there's different grades of those you can get. You can get one that just is temperature and relative humidity and other variables. But that's a great little device for, and it's thick.
Anybody got any more questions? We can get her back here. Let's see. It's frozen if you can hear us. Let's see if I can turn the camera off. Maybe.
Hey.
Hey, we lost you there for just a second, but I think we're good. I think we're good again.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's one of the joys of being in Eastern Kentucky, right? You can just you can go anytime, which I'm sure happens everywhere.
Right. Let's see. Anybody else have any questions? No? All right. When do you think your book's going to be out? You might have mentioned that, but I was going to ask you anyway. Again.
Yeah. To the point where I don't even want to say anymore. I'm sure mid-September.
Right.
Because I really want to get it out there so that way people will have some opportunity to look at it and still plant some stuff.
Right.
You know, that was the whole goal. But we are it's insane around here right now. You can imagine with planting, because this is, if you look at that chart.
Yeah. Well, I do actually have some winter cabbage out there. If y'all haven't picked up any of that, and I probably, even if you have picked up some of it, I've probably got more. I've probably got plenty out there. So if you need some more, you can feel free to get some. So we got plenty of that. And I did order some. I ordered some seeds, some of the stuff that's on here. Yep, I ordered some carrot seeds and some kale, different types of lettuce. Some of the stuff that she was talking about, I did order some seeds, so those actually shipped today. So if y'all check with me, I'm not going to be in next week actually, but the week after next, I will. I should have some of that stuff. Yep. All right. So.
That seed that you gave out this spring, didn't it have a winter in it?
Yeah, there probably was some in that. Yep. So let's see.
Hey.
Hey, I lowered our bandwidth on the video quality there.
Okay.
I'm going to drop it down as low as I can just to see. So only when I take it down to that. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to leave it on audio only for now. Then that way we can make sure we can hear you.
Okay.
But yeah, I was. So you all, how many acres did you say that you all are doing now? You were telling us about all the things that you're planting. And you're so you're doing 1 acre. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you're selling primarily through your website, correct?
Well, the online store is during farmers market season.
Okay.
We have that offline.
Okay.
So actually, if you were to go to our online store, which is 4petalfarm.com, you would see our offerings from kind of the end of spring.
Right.
You know, before the market season began.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but we'll be opening that back up because pretty much once farmers market is gone, we want people to have that opportunity to pick out what they want.
Right. And then you'll pick up with you still do a CSA, right? Through that is that a big?
Well, you know, we're toying around. We'll probably do a CSA this year.
Yeah.
We're still crunching the numbers, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And this is John's first winter doing full time.
Uh-huh.
and he wants to make sure that he doesn't overextend himself too.
Yeah. I like the web store idea.
Yeah, so you know, we're crunching the numbers still to see, is that what we want to do? Do we want to commit to the CSA? We have had, I mean, we've got a huge waiting list for it. People want it.
Right. Yeah.
If we were to offer it, I mean, we would not have enough shares to meet the demand for the CSA.
I do have a question. Somebody wants to know roughly, roughly the income per acre you expect, you know, on your type of production system.
Yeah. So, and that's something that I can share with you also in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to think if I've got it. I don't have it on here, but I can send that to you all. But what I've done is, with our projections, we have it broken down, like how much we are making per bed.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So if we plant a bed of carrots, you know, this is what we anticipate as revenue for that bed of carrots.
Right.
Okay. So, you know, that, and this is something really important to do if you're going to farm as a business, because then you get to really see, especially when we're doing an acre of production, and you know, really half of that is in cover crop.
Right.
Okay, so what our projections are for the winter season, what we have projected, now this includes our winter squash that, you know, is destined for CSA baskets if we do a CSA, otherwise we sell them. And it also includes sweet potatoes. But what we have projected through our season into March is $26,000.
Okay.
Okay, for gross.
Right.
Okay. And that is that does not include, however, we haven't included in that high tunnel. So we're putting in a 30 by 96 high tunnel.
Yep.
And with that 30 by 96 high tunnel, that can really significantly increase what we can make, because it's, you know, some higher end. There's a lot of money in greens. There's a reason we do a lot of salad mix.
Yeah.
You know, greens make the green.
Yep, they do.
The root crops are also very profitable. You know what's not profitable? Onions.
Right.
You know, a whole bed, a 4 foot by 50 foot bed of onions I might make $50 off that. That is not worth my time when I can, for that same bed, make 10 times that much doing a root crop.
Yep.
And doing onions, all the cultivation and everything like that is going to be a lot more work.
Uh-huh.
You know, so yeah, so it's a lot of, it's small acreage, but we're growing it really intensively. You know, we're not big widely spaced rows. These are almost 4 foot wide beds that are 50 feet long. So we get, and we cover them. Because by everything filling in, you don't have to cultivate so often. You know, you keep weeds shaded out. So we do a lot of intensive planting, and a lot of succession planting too.
Right.
And so generally the guideline that we kind of go by is we're wanting to shoot for crops that are paying $1 per square foot per month.
$1 per square foot per month.
Right.
Okay.
It's kind of the formula that we go by. So in other words, if I grow broccoli, okay, and that's going to take up, let's say I do a real intensive spacing on broccoli. Even at a real intensive spacing on broccoli, that's going to take up about 3 square feet, right?
Right.
Okay, so if I'm selling that, and that's going to take, in the fall, it's going to take about 3 months for that to, not quite 3 months, but it's going to take close to 3 months to mature in that space, right?
Right.
I mean, most broccoli is like 65 days to harvest, but you add that fall factor onto it, and then you're looking at about 3 months. So broccoli, head broccoli for me, we might grow it for ourselves to eat, but I don't grow it to sell unless I can sell it, you know, for, you know, even if I were to sell $3 for that crown of broccoli, that would not be profitable for me because it takes that 3 months and it's about 3 square feet area that it takes up.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm looking at about $1 for that 3 square feet, if we think of it on a month by month basis. Versus if I take that land and I grow salad mix on it, and I can sell the turnover with salad mix is, you know, I can cut that all day long, and I'm getting $6 for a half a pound bag. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. And
okay, so
I'm glad you mentioned, I was going to ask one more question about the harvest of your salad and your baby greens. Like what do you use? Do you have one of those, like I've seen those drill operated cutters and a lot of different styles, like the hand one that you kind of saw back and forth. What do you recommend for the harvest of your baby greens? Yeah, so it totally depends on your setup. In the intensive beds, provided you have done some type of sterile seed bed prep or something like that, then one of those little drill powered cutters like you're talking about, yep,
can make total sense. And we've thought about that. But to be honest with you, with our production system that we have right now, from where we have this new ground that has a huge perennial, it has a huge weed seed bank.
Right.
And it also has a lot of perennial weeds that we're dealing with.
Yep. Okay.
So regardless of, even if we do a sterile seed bed prep, we'll get violets coming up through it and all this other stuff. So unless you're gonna get things to where you've got a nice sterile seed bed and the only thing that's coming up is your crop that you're wanting to harvest, that's the only way that that device makes sense, because otherwise what you do is, instead of spending your time out there cutting by hand, now you're spending it in the packing shed going through taking out all the weeds.
Right. Yep.
Okay, so it really depends on your production system. We're hoping that one day we're going to get to the point where that piece of equipment makes sense for us to buy it.
Sure.
But we haven't reached that point yet.
Right.
But when it does, it's going to be glorious. You know, it's going to be fantastic. But right now, what we're doing is we're going out and we're cutting by hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody got any more questions? We've got a guy asking, what time of year do you put in your cover? You said you're looking for a certain temperature, right? When you put that cover over, like.
Yeah. So, you know, for instance, this past winter, it was like November. Yeah, we had that crazy fall where it was just ridiculously warm, and you know, I kind of watch the weather, and if they're calling for, you know, if that first freeze is going to be a doozy, I might get out there and cover. And by doozy, I mean 23,
right,
or 25. Well, you know, our first frost this year was 26, but you know, I learned my lesson with that. I'm in a holler now. So if the forecast is for 28, it easily hit 24 here.
Yeah. Yep.
So when I didn't have tunnels up there, I really didn't think it was going to get that cold. You know, 26 degrees for our first freeze. Usually I'd give them a little bit of protection, but you know, they made it through just fine. That first, go ahead and let them get hit with frost a few times. They will be fine from it, and they'll actually benefit from it.
Okay.
You know, that'll help them cold acclimate and taste better too. Even after that first 1 or 2 freezes that we get, it's amazing the difference.
Yep.
in the flavor of them after they've been subjected to frost a few times. But you know, so generally it's good practice to go ahead and have your hoops up, have your row cover ready to go, so you're not getting surprised with some kind of wacky 23-degree first freeze. Most things would make it, but you know, some things, if it were really windy, for instance, and you had that first freeze and it had been warm leading into the event,
yeah,
then you could see some damage. It's when those plants don't get that chance to build those sugars and get cold, and then boom, you get hit with a really hard freeze. That's when there's trouble. But if it's been kind of cool leading into it, and you've already had nights in the low 30s, you know, if they're calling for frost and it doesn't look like it's going to be a significant dip, they're going to be fine out there.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, I think does anybody have any more questions? All right. Well, I think that's all the questions we have, and we surely appreciate you taking the time to do this for us. And this is some great information, and we'll be putting it to use.
Awesome. Well, good luck, and thanks a lot. This has been a lot of fun.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay. Y'all have a good one.
You too.